Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review. Rush, Clockwork Angels. These guys are an Ontario rock band responsible for some of the most celebrated albums that progressive rock has to offer. Definitely not my favorite progressive rock band because Pink Floyd, Soft Machine, King Crimson, Frank Zappa, and Jethro Tull all kind of come in first. But Rush is definitely, I would say, in front of them when it comes to being the most accessible in their respective style. Funny enough, the band kind of started with this blend of blues rock and hard rock. The latter of the two never really left their sound, I guess, as they progressed from album to album to album. Even as they started getting more technical, more conceptual with their music. And Rush actually put out some of their best records when progressive rock was kind of considered to be in its downturn. Pink Floyd was breaking up, Yes was going pop, and eventually even Rush started kind of playing toward the demands of the new wave, but was still able to kind of maintain their personality, their style, and a really sizable following. Now, from the mid to late 80s to the late 90s, it's not exactly the most celebrated spot in Rush's career. And it's not really because they started putting out the most awful records on the planet or anything like that. I mean, I would say more or less they kind of stuck to their blend of hard rock, progressive rock, and pretty catchy hooks. I guess I would just say that interest outside of hardcore fans kind of waned once Rush stopped offering surprises. Where's the band gonna go next? You pretty much know they're going to stick to their Rush sound, which is not necessarily a bad thing because in the 2000s, Rush is still putting out albums consistently like they always have. They're just a picture of consistency. After decades of being in the music business, they're still relying on Geddy Lee's upper register tenor vocals, his hard bass riffs, Neil Peart's tight fills, energetic drumming, his fantasy lyrics, Alex Lifeson's bright distorted guitars, his fiery solos. Rush does what they usually do, as good as you would want them to do it in 2012. But, you know, is there any reason to believe that this LP is better than their recent releases, better than their classic releases? And in my opinion, I'm going to be completely honest, technically, I would say no. There are progressive elements of this album, undeniably a prog rock album, but do I feel like Rush is kind of pushing themselves to play better than ever on this LP? I don't think so. There are actually some songs on here that I'm pretty surprised at how simple some of them are, like on The Anarchist, which rides this really kind of familiar chord progression I feel like I've heard turn up in many songs. Or the song Wreckers, which has this really kind of melodic, smooth, sweet hook that is pretty catchy, but instrumentally, you know, performance-wise, kind of underwhelming. But there are moments where you get some flashy drum fills, you'll get some really great chaotic guitar solos, or ones that are very kind of melodic and purposeful. And of course, Geddy's bass playing is very on point. You get a lot of moments where he'll throw a fast little bass riff in, a lot of personality in his playing. You really know a Geddy riff when you hear it. But overall, while I do think this album is sounding a little bolder, a little ballsier, and more ambitious than most of their albums that they have put out since the year 2000, I don't really feel like, oh, Rush, man, better than ever. Because, you know, these guys are world famous, they're multi-platinum, they have made music that pretty much changed the face of progressive rock. What do they have to prove at this point? I would say nothing. You know, and there are points on this album where it feels like Rush acknowledges that a little bit, especially when it comes to the technical abilities of this album. But just because I feel like on an individual level this album isn't really blowing me away, I don't think Rush is playing badly or anything like that. I actually think as a unit, Rush shines pretty brightly on this album. They actually pull out some really great jams on some of these tracks. The opening track, Caravan, has a great jam over the bridge. And the jam kind of segues very tightly from one phase to another. Geddy is pulling all these riffs out that are just so pure classic Rush, totally the stuff that was a huge influence on Primus's early work. The recording on this album can be, a little sterile at times, a little too plastic, modernized, but through that, there is still this immense chemistry that I feel between these guys on this album, even when a song is just okay. There's just a nice energy, some nice interaction here between the chords and the rhythms and the melodies that these guys play that just comes with the decades of experience they have performing with each other. I guess another slight letdown on this album would have to be the structures of some of these songs, though I know that choruses have always been a big slice of Rush's pie. I do feel like some of these songs on here are a little plainly structured with some riffs or some chords that are built out of what the verse instrumentation is, and that kind of makes the intro. Then you get your verses, choruses, and verses, bridge or solo, outro, bam. And when you do get a bit of a detour on a song sometimes, it just feels really silly and almost unnecessary. Like the really bluesy acoustic break on the title track, which has Geddy's vocals with these really terrible effects on them. Or the cheesy stock sound of children laughing and going, yay! On the song Carnies. It sounds like it was ripped off of a sound effects CD. I guess the one last major letdown of this album, I guess I could say, are the introductions to some of these songs. Back in the day, when Rush was at their pinnacle, they could write some awesome introductions to songs, whether they were beautiful and delicate with just awesome guitar parts like on 2112, or just very quirky, weird, unique, and hard-hitting like a number of intros on Hemispheres or Moving Pictures. Rush just knew how to craft intros that built up excitement and tension and really just grabbed a hold of your ears and demanded attention. On here though, a lot of these tracks kind of will start off with some boring sound effects, maybe a synthesizer or just a tone just slathered in way too much reverb or atmosphere to really be engaging or really have a sound or a texture all its own. And then after that kind of hums or just hangs in the air for a moment or two, the song just starts. It feels like it's being delivered up fast food style. Now, the one thing that does work and does impress on this album to me is the songwriting and the lyrics, the concept of this album. Now, the verses behind these tracks, the musical verses in terms of the section I'm talking about, can be a little hit or miss, but the choruses are straight up great on a lot of these tracks. Really anthemic, melodic, memorable. All I know is that sometimes the truth is contrary. And of course it helps that Geddy Lee still has a lot of passion in his voice. He doesn't really push those really fierce highs like he used to back in the day, but he still sings with a lot of, I guess, sincerity. As usual, his voice is kind of an acquired taste, and I'm glad into his older age he's still been able to maintain a lot of personality and just command with it. Now, the most ambitious thing about this album and the thing about this LP that I think most Rush fans have been excited about and really have been praising this album over are the lyrics and the concept. This album, from what I've read and from what I understand by listening to the music itself, is supposed to be a story. And a lot of the tracks either paint character portraits of people in this story or groups of people or situations that occur in this story. And from what I understand, there's supposed to be a possible novel in the works with this story kind of as the blueprint. And the story itself is kind of an abstract fantasy, I would say, which is fine. You know, it's really cool to get all of these very out there lyrics, but I wouldn't say it's a story in the sense of you listen to this album and you get, oh, this happened, and then this other thing happened, and oh, here's the next thing that happened, and oh, here's like the climax. Of course, that's open to interpretation, but I feel like more than anything from this album, I get a lot of whiffs of full philosophy from Neil Peart's lyrics. Whether it's a song called Halo Effect, whose title pretty much explains the subject matter, or a song talking about the truth not necessarily being what it seems, or a number of tracks that talk about free will, having control over yourself, other things trying to impose control upon you. There's a lot to enjoy and a lot to kind of perceive and see as being profound in what Rush says in a lot of its songs with this LP. I think overall it's a fan pleaser for the most part. Like I said earlier, is Rush sounding better than ever in this phase of their career? I would say yes, but am I going to be returning to this album in the same way that I returned to their classic LPs? Honestly, no. And that's just how I'm feeling personally. What did you guys think of this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? How do you feel it ranks in the rest of Rush's discography? And yeah, what should I review next? Blah, 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 blah. Personally, I mean, I like the LP, but I don't really love it. You know, none of it really got me excited. I feel like I was pleased by this album, satisfied by this album on the level of a fan, you know, in the way that a fan would be, wow, you know, Rush actually made some good songs on this album. I didn't find any of the songs to be terrible on this album. And I'm very happy that the band, after all these years, has been able to make an album that, yeah, good. So I'm kind of feeling a light to decent 6 on this LP. And that's about it. Rush, Clockwork Angels, forever.